Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series, Interviews with Disciples and Devotees. And today I have a very fine friend to introduce to you, Bryce. Namaste, Bryce.
Namaste, Narad.
Bryce has played the flute for many years in the ashram, and I've attended many of his concerts, and he's an excellent flutist. Do you say flautist or flutist?
In India, flutist?
In England, flautist.
Yes,
Okay,
I think so.
Well, I always begin with one question, Bryce, and that is, how did you first hear of Sri Aurobindo and Mother?
Well, that's an interesting question. I thought the question might be, how did I come to the ashram? Because I came to the ashram pretty much and then came to meet Mother and Sri Aurobindo.
So how did you get to come to the ashram?
Well, I think my mother took some part in that because I was working as an engineer in Australia, and my engineering job was not answering any of my bigger questions. And I think my mother saw my psychological state, and she said, "Why don't you try meditating?" And I had no idea about meditation. I was just looking at the wall and trying to silence the mind.
About how old were you then?
24, 25. And it seemed I made no progress at all in meditation, and perhaps gave it up. And not long after that, I think, I had this experience. I was just waking up in the morning, and it was like a vision of India. India from a height, with just the plains and the Himalayas and a vast blue sky. And I just telephoned my mother and I said, I have to go to India. And I gave my notice at work. I had to give 2 weeks notice. And so that was the beginning of my adventure. It was in November 78. I left Australia. I had a flight ticket for Bali. And sure enough, I was going to India, but I was going to enjoy the way also. So I first went to Bali. I spent perhaps a month or so in Bali, and saw some of the other parts of Indonesia, like Lombok and Java. I was, of course, on my way going towards further up in Southeast Asia. And I went through Java, and I was with a group of friends who were going to take a flight from Jakarta straight to Singapore. And I joined them rather than going all the way through Sumatra. So I saw Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, then took a flight to Burma, as it was at that time, and I had a week in Burma, and then another flight to Calcutta in India. So finally I was just traveling about 9 months before I came to the ashram. It seemed by chance that I came to the ashram, and
In Calcutta? Traveled all the way south?
no, much more travel in North India, including Nepal, Ladakh. I was on the Buddhist circuit for a while. I was in Dharamsala. I stayed there for 1 month, rented a small cottage, and while I was there, the the Dalai Lama came back from some of his travels, and I was in MacLeod Gunj when the Dalai Lama came back, and we were told not to go upstairs in the houses. We were not allowed to look down on the Dalai Lama as he came through the streets. So the Dalai Lama returned, and there were big pujas going on in the Tibetan monastery. But also,
Did you ever meet him personally?
no, I didn't personally meet him.
I kept him pretty well guarded.
He was guarded, but probably if I had asked, I think he probably would have allowed. In Dharamsala, there were many Westerners were there, and the Tibetan library was very busy. There were monks, small, very young monks who were training, learning their mantras, and lots of Westerners who were learning Tibetan also. And I was simply impressed. I saw the SABCL, Sri Aurobindo's works on the shelf, occupying a space like this. And I was really impressed, but I don't think I opened one of the volumes at that time. I bought a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, and I was reading that when I was at the Tibetan library. So a month there in Dharamsala. I continued on to Kashmir, and from there took a 2-day bus trip to Leh, Ladakh. That was very difficult, a 2-day bus trip going there.
Yes.
The number of corners there on the road it was lucky I was young at that time, so that I could manage the corners. But I came back to Amritsar and then Delhi, I think, and then I came south, and I was in Madras for a few days, and then finally I came to Pondicherry. I got off the bus. I think I was in Gandhi Street. I got off the bus, and with my backpack on my back, I walked to the ashram, and I came into the area of the ashram. I think I stepped into Sabda, the old Sabda. Rijuta happened to be there.
Oh my gosh.
And I looked at Rijuta into her eyes, and I thought, my gosh, she's really, I can see all the way through to...
Well, you know, she was in charge of all the Americans. And I knew her.
Yes?
Yes, maybe you can tell us a little more about her.
Well, I can't say much about Rijuta. I was an absolute newcomer. I knew nothing at all. And I was an Australian also. I won't say more about that.
Okay. I got it.
So I just came to the ashram. I stayed in Standard Store's guest house, which is above where Grindy's shop is now. And I stayed about 11 months, I think, at first. And I was reading some of the, as I was told, the easier books to read, like The Adventure of Consciousness, and some of the easy compilations compiled from letters of Sri Aurobindo, which were a little easier to read than some of the works. I bought a copy of The Mother, also a very small book, and I read that, and it didn't really mean anything to me at that time. So basically that's how I came to the ashram.
And how you stayed 11 months, then what happened?
Well, I knew that I wanted to remain in the ashram. It just dawned on me that this was the place that I had been searching for. And it was answering all the emptiness that was there. It was filling that up. So there was no question of traveling anymore. So I stayed as long as I could. I was clear that I wanted to clear up things in Australia. So I went back to Australia, sold my motorcycle and packed all my things, and I came back to Pondicherry.
Was your mother a disciple of anyone, or?
She was a self-made yoga and Tai Chi teacher.
Oh.
She, for many, many years, she was teaching yoga and Tai Chi. In her, a little earlier, she had been a gym instructress, a trampoline and gym instructress. So she moved on and to the more inward aspects of our being, and she was teaching Tai Chi and yoga. She learned Tai Chi from a Chinese professor in Melbourne, Dr. Wong. She was doing the Tai Chi movements, and she reached a level where the teacher was offering to teach her what he called swords. And I think my mother left at that time. I don't really know what was involved in that.
Did any of the sports things rub off on you?
Yes, our whole family was going through a health kick, you could say. We had been meat eaters all our life until that stage, and we turned towards vegetarianism at around that time. My mother was reading voraciously anything from spiritual masters, and she had quite a library which her yoga students could look through. They could borrow books from her. She had a specially made yoga and Tai Chi room. So I would say she was the one who really set me on the path.
So you sold everything and you had some funds with you and came back here.
Yes,
What year was that?
Let's see, 79 I arrived. During 80 I left Pondi and I was away for more than a year, I think.
Roughly 82?
No, it was 18, 11, 81 that I came back. Flew into Calcutta for some reason. I don't know why I came to North India. So I took a train down south again. And
when did you first meet Mother?
Oh, no, Mother had left 6 years before I came.
73,
So
right? So you
I
had
arrived.
not met her.
I arrived first in 79. So Mother had left 6 years earlier.
Yes,
yes. But many of the places, guest houses, the ashram, of course, I felt something very powerful in many places, including Reg's guest house.
Oh yes, I stayed there also. Did you stay there?
I didn't stay there, but I was staying with Naina Ben at Society Guest House, which was quite close. So I was often at Reg's guest house. He had a pet monkey, I think. Some of the students would come and see the pet monkey. But also the entrance hall of Reg's guest house, beautiful, I think, parquetry floor, and a very impressive building, which Reg kept extremely well, beautifully kept. And I just felt the presence there was like something palpable almost. So I enjoyed going there very, very much. Even at Nainaben's guest house, Champaklal had installed Mother and Sri Aurobindo's photo in the meditation room. So there also it was very powerful.
I always like to ask about some of the ashramites that you may have met and you could tell us about, because people are, this is their spiritual food when they see us.
Yes.
So please feel free to speak of any of them with whom you were a little closer or whom you knew.
Yes. Well, I missed out on meeting some of the great sadhaks like Nolinida, but I met Dyuman Bhai, just not very much. I didn't get to know him well. The ones I got to know well were Shambhuda in the electric workshop and Bulada. Bulada was in charge of electric service, and Bulada would come quite often to visit Shambhuda in the department, electric workshop, which is where I was working for some time. And Shambhuda and Bulada would just be laughing and chuckling the whole time over, I don't know whether they were speaking in Bengali or English, but just their laughter was something wonderful for me.
And Champaklal?
Champaklal, I met Champaklal personally. I don't think I can say I met him, but I was in many music programs. So very often with the music group, we would go to Sri Aurobindo's room on the day of the music program. So I saw Champaklal many times, and sometimes Uttam would be there in our group. Uttam,
yeah,
of course,
yes.
playing tabla.
Yes.
And Champaklal would just light up when he saw Uttam.
Oh.
And the two of them would be greeting each other. Champaklal wasn't speaking, but so I got to see Champaklal in that way. I remember so much Champaklal's complexion. It was almost transparent. I don't know whether I've seen Europeans with very fair skin, but it was still not like Champaklal. Champaklal, well, when he was lighting up like that, he was, you could say, radiant. But it was just the almost transparency of the skin that I noticed.
Anyone else?
Oh, there must be, but
I guess Ambu was already gone, or?
Ambu I only saw. Ambu was a friend of Bob.
Oh, yes.
Bob would very often go and visit Ambu.
Yes.
I didn't see much of Ambu. I wasn't actually seeking out any guru or any particular person. I was feeling so much filled up with what I was feeling just in the ashram area. I think at the beginning I was working in the dining room once a day, but I was also working in the electric workshop. And my work in the dining room was purely physical. It was just carrying full trays of stainless steel dishes back into the serving area from the wiping area.
Did you meet Ved Prakash?
Yes, certainly met Ved Prakash very much. Ved Prakash, Vedji as we called him, he was thankfully quite innovative in what he was doing at the dining room.
Oh, yes.
Thanks to Ved Prakash, we have the steam cooking in the dining room. We also had some innovations in food like sprouts, sometimes non-milk products, non-milk protein products like sesame or maybe groundnuts ground into almost a milk or a paste, certain things like that. Veggie, once there was a student, I had one flute student in the school named Shoma Kundu, and her family was very friendly with Veggie also. And after Shoma finished her studies here, she finally worked as a teacher in Kunur. And she also learned Bharatanatyam dance in Kunur. And she invited many people, including Veggie, to Kunur for her Arangetram, for her first dance performance. So, how many people? There must have been 15 or so people that she invited to Kunur. Mm-hmm. So, some of us went in the bus, some of the boys went with Veggie in the car so that they could look after him nicely on the way. Mm-hmm. So we all went to this program in the Providence College in Kunur, Veggie included. That was.
And how was her dance?
Her dance was excellent. She had a very good teacher named Nalini Prakash, who was half German, half Indian. She also had some very good gurus from, some of the top gurus from Chennai. I can't remember the name of her guru, but Nalini Prakash was doing great work in bringing some culture to the Nilgiris, because there wasn't much culture there, and to bring Bharatanatyam at quite a high level, it was quite something for Kunur. And the program, not only Shoma danced extremely well, but all the students danced really well. In their group dance, such precision you would rarely see. Maybe it's a combination of German precision and Indian bhav. Yes. So it was a very fine program.
Bryce, I'd like to ask you to give us some background in your musical life and your flute playing.
Well, that was a very big part of my life in the ashram.
Well, how did you begin to study flute?
I began learning Western flute when I was very young, when I was in school. I didn't go very far in the Western flute, but in India I was at the dining room in the ashram. I met Tublu. Tublu was a flute player. Yes. I think his real name is Aniruddha Banerjee.
That's how I knew him.
Yes. Yeah. Did you interview Tarunda or Tublu?
Tarunda and Tublu. Not sure if I did Tublu, but he was in my choir.
Yes.
The ashram choir.
Yes. Okay.
1961.
Right, that would be right.
Yeah, he was a good flutist.
Yes, he was.
So tell me a little about it.
So I met Tublu at the dining room, and he suggested I could come and have some flute lessons, which I did, and I began learning Indian flute, and I continued with Tublu for about 4 years. Basically, Tublu was quite often going to Bombay, and he was going to a flute maker in Bombay. Ramchandra Dhotre was the name of that flute maker. He was a very good flute maker also. It happened that Tublu gave me all of his flutes before he passed away, which is a little bit before the lockdown. And they're really excellent flutes. because Tublu had bought so many and sold many, many flutes. Of course, he would keep the very best flutes. And so it's a really fine collection of flutes with amazing tone, even on the lowest notes, which often many a flute will be fairly quiet on the very low notes. But his flutes have an amazing loud-speaking tone on the low notes. And so anyway, I learned with Tublu for 4 years and got to know the basics of the bamboo flute, because I knew something about the Western silver flute already. And
how did you feel about the bamboo flute versus the silver flute?
The main feature of the bamboo flute is that you can do the Indian mean or slide. You can slide. You can go slowly from one note to the other. And on the Western flute, that's very difficult. It might be possible, but I don't think most people try it really. So that makes the bamboo flute very expressive, and it means it lends itself extremely well to Indian music, which should be full of bhav and feeling. The raga music, of course, if you look at the sitar, it's designed for pulling, for doing this meend. The meend in Western terms is a glissando.
Oh, a glissando.
You can do a glissando on a sitar. You can pull maybe 5 notes. You could play, even without moving your hand, you could play Samarepa. You could manage that in, say, in Myanki Malhar raga on the flute. That particular mean is difficult, but of course you can easily slide from low pa to any of the other notes. These days people are putting an extra hole for the thumb on the flute, so giving it further possibilities. But Indian music must have this glissando or mean. It's one of the main means or powers of expression in the Indian music. So the bamboo flute lends itself to that. It doesn't have the penetrating sound of the Western side flute, and it doesn't have the very high range also of the Western side flute. But for Indian music, it's by far the best.
And you fell in love with Indian music?
Very much, yes.
Tell us about that.
Maybe through some negative circumstance, I woke up to Indian music because I was at somebody's house and the television was on, and one of the VIPs in India had passed away. So there was no normal programming, and they were playing fully classical music for the whole day. So I was hearing Indian classical music, and I was marveling at the power of a single note. A single note in Indian music, very rarely they will play just that note. On a piano you can play dum like that. In Indian music they will not play a plain note. They will put alankars or ornamentation on the note. They'll go they'll come to the note, or they'll do something with it.
So even with the pedal depressed on the piano, you don't have that length.
With the pedal depressed, you can play a long note, but you can't slide up to that note. People these days are innovating on keyboards, electronic keyboards.
Yes.
So they're doing amazing things now to make a keyboard able to do Indian music. But things like the Raleigh keyboard, developed in England, I think. It's got a rubber surface on the keyboard, and you can slide your finger. So if you want, you can play Indian music on it. But as I was saying, in Indian music, the alap of the classical music especially, it's the power is there just in one single note. In a Western orchestra, the orchestra players they're busy playing their notes, but it's because of all of them together that the effect of the music comes. But in India, a solitary musician, whether he's using voice or sitar or any instrument, it has this something inward.
And was that what pulled you when you listened to that music that was going on when the VIP passed?
Yes. I was just marveling at what can be done with a single note in Indian music. I thought, what is this? So it's the soul power of the musician coming out on that note. Something is there. So,
have you met any of the great Indian musicians?
I've sat with Shiv Kumar Sharma at a meal. He's just like an ordinary person. He wasn't exalting himself or anything. He had given a concert at the Jipmer auditorium. He and a few friends were staying at a big hotel in Pondi, and we had a meal with them.
Oh.
I could remember some of the great things that he has participated in India. One was the music of the Call of the Valley. It was music done by classical musicians, Hari Prasad Chaurasia, Shiv Kumar Sharma, Braj Bhushan Kabra. They were classical musicians coming together and doing slightly lighter than classical music. And that Call of the Valley album, it came out as a cassette. I think CDs came later. And it just set a new standard for Indian music. The music there is like laid-back classical. It's easy to listen to for anyone, and yet a tremendously high classical standard is there.
Because they were all great musicians.
Yes, they were.
Oh.
It might have been recorded overseas, I'm not sure. But Shiv Kumar Sharma and Hari Prasad Chaurasia, they were apparently great friends. They were together in music for so many years. Shiv Kumar Sharma brought the santur to the classical stage. I think it was not there before. Before Shiv Kumar, the santur was just a Kashmiri folk instrument. So
and I love its sound.
Oh, it's a beautiful sound. Beautiful tinkling sound. Reminds me of a crystal clear stream coming down the mountains. But Shiv Kumar had been a tabla player before he started playing the santur, and his mastery in rhythm certainly comes out in his santur music. So he set such a standard for the santur. Many have followed on, and it still remains a classical instrument now.
How did you get on with learning the rhythms of Indian music?
The rhythms, I didn't have too much trouble with some of the very basic rhythms like tintal or Kahwa in 8 beats, even Dadra in 6 beats. These were no problem for me, but I noticed in my stay here in the ashram, Bashab Sen was here he came to Pondicherry from Calcutta. He was already an All India Radio musician, a master of sitar, and he just reveled in the rhythms. And I looked at him and I thought, well, I'm not yet at this stage that I can just play with the rhythms like he can. So, and also I was specially concentrating on the pitch, accuracy of pitch, in order to do the alap. Since it was alap which had inspired me in the beginning, I was pursuing that line much more than the rhythms. But it was certainly Bashab who gave me a big push towards working more with the tabla and learning to enjoy the rhythms.
How many students have you had?
Have I had?
Or you still do, I suppose?
At the moment, I hardly have any students. I've had probably 100 or maybe. In the school, the students would, year after year, the students would come along and some of them would continue with flute. There's one who is continuing flute now, Sarthak Harore. He's living in Oroville and he's taking over from me, I hope. He's playing extremely well. I don't think I played that well. He's at a young age, he's playing very well. I don't think I was that talented, and it took me years to learn to play some of the difficult ragas like Malkons on the flute. It's very difficult because it's almost all half holes. You have to manage to accurately cover half holes on the flute. So Sarthak is doing very well. During the lockdown, I took up some work at the archives. So it's indexing work. I'm indexing the Rigvedic hymns, which have been translated by Sri Aurobindo. In the new complete works of Sri Aurobindo, there's much more material than there was in the SABCL.
Yes, and I understand a lot of it's because people keep sending things from their families.
Sending new material?
New material, letters.
I wonder if that's true about at least the Vedic work.
I don't think so.
No, I'd say the Vedic notebooks were there.
Yes, I think it's more the letters on Sri Aurobindo.
Yes,
Letters Sri Aurobindo.
Letters certainly.
Yeah. So this is from the Vedic material.
Yes. Richard has worked on the notebooks a lot. So, say the volume Hymns to the Mystic Fire, it was this thick before, it's expanded so much. So many more hymns to Agni, organized very nicely. And
from Sri Aurobindo's translation?
From Sri Aurobindo's notebooks. Plus the Sanskrit of the hymn is there always, so you don't need anything else to study it. The Secret of the Veda, I've been fortunate to read it over and over, because there also, when I first began to read it, it didn't mean much to me, but as I get more familiar with the Sanskrit of the hymns and with Sri Aurobindo's line of argument and the experiences he had, which brought him to these realizations on the Veda. It's the Secret of the Veda. It's quite a difficult book which requires more than one reading.
For all those who are young flutists or musicians, what could you say to them about learning flute in your experience?
I would say just try to get a good flute and just play it. Go on playing and listening. You have to listen. Go on listening all the time. Listen to what the best musicians do. Listen to the national program on the radio. If you can follow with your own instrument, whatever it is, whether it's flute or sitar, whatever, just see how the master musicians are using the notes. And probably in the beginning, try to find a teacher. At the very beginning, a teacher who can get a good instrument for you.
My next question, of course, you're free not to answer, but could you speak of any of your experiences with Mother or Sri Aurobindo?
Well, I mentioned that first experience which I had in Australia. Mm-hmm. That experience was something wonderful for me, quite unexpected, but the things I've felt here in Pondi after coming, they far exceed that. It's just a constant opening up. You maintain the contact with Sri Aurobindo mainly through the books, I think. Although through work, even my work in the dining room was something amazing for me also.
In what way?
Maybe because it was the first time I was working as offering, but importantly, in Sri Aurobindo Ashram, as Sri Aurobindo was, Shakti worshippers. Worshippers, I mean, it's a so completely balanced system. In Australia, I went to boys' school. I worked as an engineer, not having so much contact with women, I suppose, but just working in the dining room, whether chatting or working or whatever, it was just balancing me out. For 20 years or more, I worked in the dining room, using my physical strength just for carrying things in the dining room. But I was just surrounded by Shakti, I suppose. It was a sheer joy, and I could feel it was just balancing my whole self, making up for what had been missing earlier in my life.
I have an interesting story to share with you about Huta washing plates and another man who washed spoons. And one day, I believe it was, he said to Huta, "Why do you wash plates?" And she gave him some answer, and he said, "I like spoons." Each one is different.
Yes.
How we find that out, isn't it? Yes. Among people now of this time, in the 2000 era, who are you close to?
Who am I close to?
You must have a number of friends.
Yes, I think I have a number of friends. Should I mention their names?
Certainly. I probably know many of them also.
Yes, I think you might. But it's difficult for me to I feel like there's a oneness,
Wonderful.
a whole brother and sisterhood in the ashram. It's a family. I meet certain people each day. People who are a joy for me to meet, even though I meet them every day. We might greet with great joy, or we might hardly say anything. It doesn't matter. But so many people. I don't think I want to mention names.
Good.
Really.
It's fine. Sure. Last question. Oroville.
Oroville, yes.
Can you tell us a little of your experiences
Yes.
in or with Oroville?
In my early days in the ashram, I was going out to Oroville on my cycle quite often, and I was often visiting Samriddhi community. Alan and Charles were there. It was very early days, and they were just living in capsules built on granite pillars, and they had a bamboo right outside one of their rooms. They were all living harmoniously.
What kind of bamboo was it?
I think it was a
cobra?
cobra. I think it was a cobra. And I would go out there and visit. They were both English, Alan and Charles, English. I was an Australian. I was marveling at their situation compared with mine in the town. And it was beautiful for me to go out to Oroville and breathe the fresh air. But I've played music with the Orovillians. We were doing the Peacemakers with the Oroville Choir, and an orchestra put together, led by Matt. Matt was playing the saxophone. That was done, I think it was done 2 years in a row, the Peacemakers, in Bharat Nivas. And it was quite a big production. I enjoyed that very much. I had stayed some nights in Oroville, again at Samriddhi.
Did you give many concerts there?
Not very many. I was never really ambitious to give concerts. I was not running around hunting for teachers. I was interested in music. I was listening to the national music program every Saturday, and I had a flute for every single pitch. I mean, C, C sharp, D, D sharp. Any pitch whether it was a vocalist, the male vocalists would often sing on C, C sharp, D. Women vocalists would sing on G sharp, A. I always had a flute to match, so I could just follow what they were doing with the raga music. Instrumentalists also, shahnai player, whatever instrument it was, I could follow. And especially the alap, I was following what they do. So mainly in my musical life, I've been called to accompany. There were so many singing programs in the ashram, many singing programs, and I was called to just accompany with flute. Many of the singing teachers in the ashram, I knew pretty well all the singing teachers.
Shobadi?
Shobadi, Ratnadi, Meena Shah, Deepshika Di lately, many singing teachers. They would call me and I would join their program just with accompaniment. You could say flute adding a little bit of masala to the main dish. That's mainly been my occupation. So I didn't pursue classical music with the object of performing.
Go ahead, please.
Some people would push me in that direction, but it was not really where I wanted to go. I have a friend in Mysore, a flute maker friend. I've been to Mysore several times. His name is Ravi Shankar Mishra. I've joined him a little bit in flute making. And he is a performer. He plays classical very often. Wherever he's invited, he will play. So he also was pushing me to play classical. His house was a meeting place for many musicians. So when I would go to Mysore, I certainly got a big kick in the backside to do more of classical.
Last question.
Yes.
How interested are you in Western classical music, choral and orchestral and instrumental?
Well, my appreciation of Western music just goes up and up. Very much, yes. Because Western music is not limited by anything, really. It can go any direction. It's gone the way of the orchestra, even up to huge proportions, but it can go the way of a solo instrument also. Vocal, I've come to appreciate much more. Opera is there. I've very much enjoyed some Mozart operas. Enjoyed listening to what, mainly the sopranos, what the sopranos can do in the difficult passages. And I've compared sopranos, how they manage a particular passage.
Especially the coloratura passages.
Yes, that's right. So I've spent more time listening to orchestral music than to the vocal, choral music. Choral music I like very much. Mozart's Requiem, something very beautiful. Bach's choral music. Bach as a composer, something astounding. You just wonder how he had such a full life and managed such compositions. Sublime melodies, fugues which just can't be repeated, even with computers these days. We can't.
Even with the computers.
I don't think we can make a fugue like Bach has done. So finally, I see musicians who have, North Indian musicians who have visited South India and vice versa also. But South Indian music, I see it as something very great. Something so great which is that it is not fully appreciated. It's certainly not generally appreciated everywhere. It's Hindustani music from the north is probably easier to listen to. Some of the sounds we find in Hindustani music, they are there in rock music also. Rock guitar can do some of these slides which are there in Hindustani music. But South Indian music, usually if you want to pursue that line, you have to be born into it. Very difficult to just take it up. John Higgins was one American vocalist who went very far with South Indian vocal, classical. Amazing that he did so well. He was invited to the Tyagaraja festival and he sang there several times. But usually you have to be born into the Carnatic music to get very far in it.
Well, we have had almost 1 hour.
Is it, Narad? Yes.
And that's marvelous. I thank you so much, Bryce. Namaste.
Namaste, Narad.
Namaste all, and thank you.